Okay. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us this morning for this session about money and benefits. To start off today, please could you tell us a little bit about PIP and the best way for people to apply for this if indeed they're eligible?
Thanks. It's a good question. It's probably the benefit I get kind of most asked about at the centre in Maggie's. And to pick up on the actual kind of the last part of the question first, if eligible, that's the big kind of criteria with PIP. A lot of people will automatically apply if they've had a diagnosis straight away, and sometimes that can be too soon. Also, if they kind of get in touch with the Department for Work and Pensions and let them know they've had a cancer diagnosis, they will automatically tell them, well, you should be applying for PIP, without really kind of knowing themselves what the criteria for PIP is. And eventually, a little bit further down the line, it's the Department for Work and Pensions who would deny them the benefit that they told them to apply for in the first place. So it's very much about kind of if eligible, and hopefully, over the next kind of couple of minutes, I can go into it in a little bit more detail, and then you should have a little bit more kind of information on how your condition, how it's affecting you, and if PIP is the right benefit to claim kind of at that kind of point in time. So, I mean, with PIP, it's a non-means tested benefit. So it was brought in to replace disability living allowance for people of working age or understate pension age. And as I say, non-means tested, so doesn't take into account any kind of income you've got coming in, any savings, anything your partner, husband may have. It's literally kind of extra money for you on top to help you because of your health condition. So there's a qualifying kind of period for PIP, and this is where a lot of kind of people kind of what they don't know is that you must have been needing help with your health in a way for 3 months before you can apply for PIP. So it kind of, in a way, kind of rules out any kind of short-term kind of illnesses where somebody might be unwell and they apply it straight away. So you must have kind of had that health condition for 3 months before you can apply, or really kind of the effects from that kind of health condition before you can apply, because a lot of people may be suffering with the effects of the health prior to the diagnosis. So you've got that kind of 3-month qualifying period, and what they say is 9 months moving forward. So in a way, your health is not likely to kind of change significantly within the next 9 months. So it's a 12-month kind of qualifying period. You don't have to meet the qualifying criteria of the 3 months if somebody is terminally ill. So if somebody has a poor prognosis, or maybe given kind of around the kind of 6 month kind of criteria in a way, then there's a form that you could get from the consultant of a specialist nurse, and the form is called a DS 1500, so it's DS 1500, that's the specific form. And that could be filled in by a health professional, a specialist nurse, or a consultant oncologist, just stating your kind of prognosis. And then you don't have to meet the 3-month qualifying criteria for PIP. You would automatically get the enhanced rate for the daily living. You'd still have to meet the mobility question separately, because we'll go on to that in a little bit, but it does kind of fast track things through. You haven't got to go through the whole application process. It's literally kind of a phone call with your details, with your bank details. DS 1500 goes off to the DWP, and then hopefully in a couple of weeks it's all sorted. So looking at kind of the 3-month qualifying period, and obviously 9 months moving forward, it's not so much about the fact you have a cancer diagnosis, it's how your cancer diagnosis is affecting you completing the activities on the PIP form. So in a way, the fact you have a cancer diagnosis, it's irrelevant. It's how it's affecting you completing the mobility activities and also the daily living activities, which I'll come on to in a little bit. So bear with us a second. It's a point scored benefit. So therefore, you meet the daily living criteria at the standard rate, you get 8 points, 12 points for the enhanced rate. And again, with the mobility, which is looked at separately, it's 8 points for the standard rate, 12 points for the enhanced rate. And really, there are questions about in a way, your kind of day-to-day kind of activities. So 10 questions about your daily living, and then there's 2 separately kind of about your mobility. So you could very well get the highest rate for the daily living, or the enhanced rate for the daily living, but then you could get the lower rate for the mobility. And again, you could get the higher rate for the mobility, and the lower rate. It just depends on how many points you score for each kind of particular question. So the questions kind of range from preparing food for yourself to actually kind of physically kind of eating and drinking, managing your medication, but this is specifically at home. This is not in a hospital environment where you're having treatment. So washing and bathing, so getting in and out of the bath, for example, having a shower, dressing and undressing yourself, going to the toilet, communicating and reading with people, mixing with people, and managing your budgeting decisions on managing money. So those are the kind of 10 kind of questions that they look at in daily living. So it's physical health and mental health. So it doesn't have to be just the physical side of it. There's the emotional side of it. There's the encouragement and motivation that somebody may need, having kind of gone through chemotherapy treatment, and they're maybe kind of wiped out for a few days and absolutely kind of on the sofa or in bed. So they're having that kind of a lot of help then during that kind of period of time. So it's all about the help that you need to carry out those activities. The aids and appliances count as well. So what they say is, if you have a health condition, but you're using an aid and appliance to make it easier for you, or you could use an aid and appliance to make it easier for you, then they may kind of award you points for that particular kind of category. So an aid or appliance, for example, if you're struggling to kind of get in and out of the bath, you may have had surgery. So an aid or appliance, for example, could be struggling to stand up. So there's a seat in the bath. So that would be classed as an aid or appliance. A rail to hold on to step in and out of the bath to make it safe for you. That's classed as an aid or appliance. So each kind of question individually, do you need somebody to help you? Do you need to use an aid or appliance to make it easier for you to do it independently? Or are you fine with that activity? If you're fine with that activity, you won't score any points for it. The more help you need, the more points you score. And as I say, you've got to get 8 points for the standard rate and then 12 points for the enhanced. People often say, answer the question as you are on a bad day. I would say, don't start mentioning good and bad days on forms to the DWP, because what they will do is they will automatically kind of hone in on the good days. Oh, so you have some good days. Tell us about your good days. How are you today? How do you feel on a good day? Not taking into account the bad days. So it's very much how you are for the majority of the time. So if you take into account the month, if for the majority of that month you were really kind of struggling because of your diagnosis, because of the side effects of the treatment, because of any surgery that you may have had, if for the majority of the time you were struggling, then that's what we need to kind of put on the form. Yes, you may have good days. Great, hopefully you will. But there are some days where you won't feel so good. So if those days outweigh the good days, then you should be kind of looking at kind of points specifically for PIP, for the various kind of questions. What they look at as well with PIP is, can you carry out the activity safely? So if you can't, if you're at risk of harm, then you should be awarded points because you're unsafe. If you're pregnant, it's not just a safety view, it's a safety of your baby as well. So a simple kind of question, for example, the first question, the preparation of food. So are you safe in the kitchen preparing food? Bear in mind, you're holding hot pans, you've got boiling water, you're holding knives, you're chopping things. You may not be able to kind of stand as well as you kind of could before for whatever reason. Again, treatment, peripheral neuropathy in your feet, in your hands, are you gripping utensils like you used to? So this safety kind of aspect comes into account there. And really, that's what kind of every question, are you safe carrying it out? If you're not safe, you should be awarded points for it. The second one is to an acceptable standard. So prior to your diagnosis, if you were carrying on as normal and everything was great, you know, all of a sudden you've had surgery, you've you've got the mental side of kind of dealing with it, you've got the physical side of dealing with it. So everything you're carrying out now, are you doing it to an acceptable standard? If not, you should be awarded points for it. And the DWP should consider all of these things when they're assessing your claim. Repeatedly is another one. So you may be able to carry out an activity fine once in a day, but if carrying out that activity once absolutely exhausts you for the rest of the day, then you can't carry it out repeatedly. So again, if we're looking at the preparation of food, you normally kind of on average kind of have 3 meals a day. So if you make a meal in the morning, does that exhaust you to a point where you can't then make a cooked meal for yourself for the rest of the day because it's exhausted you at the initial kind of point, first time you did it? So that's the repeatedly. And the next time, and the next question is within a reasonable time period. So is it taking you a lot longer than somebody without a health condition or without a cancer diagnosis to complete the activity? So having a bath, having a shower, you may need help, physical help in and out of the bath, in and out of the shower. Bending may be a problem. If you've had surgery, upper body surgery, you need restricted movement. So are you kind of completing that activity now in reasonable time, or is it taking you a lot longer than it used to? All these things come into consideration for each question when you're thinking about PIP. So you may think, oh, I'm fine, I can do this, but can you do it repeatedly? Can you do it safely? Can you do it to an acceptable standard and in reasonable time? And if you can't for one of them, then you should be having points for that activity. So bear that in mind when you're looking at kind of completing the form. COVID's kind of come into play as well now, and thrown its hat in the ring, whereby before the DWP used to kind of gather all evidence on your behalf in a way. You put the health professionals on the form, so whoever was dealing with your care, then they would get the relevant medical confirmation and evidence from them before making their decision and before assessing you. Unfortunately, now they put the onus on the claimant up front. So not only have you got this huge form to fill in, you've also now got to run around getting the relevant kind of medical evidence from the relevant kind of, so it could be a specialist nurse who could do a letter, could be somebody from an lymphedema clinic, could be an oncologist, could be a surgeon. So anybody who can supply information, try and get it up front if you can, because that will go a long way to supporting your claim. It gives them the evidence up front in making a decision. Because if you don't supply that evidence, unfortunately, it's your word against mine. You're saying that you can't do this on the form, but in a way, can you back it up? So if you can back it up with evidence, it'll all go a long way to supporting your claim. So after the form has been filled in, after it's actually gone off with all the evidence, there's the kind of assessment kind of period then. So you'll be waiting for a call. It's passed over then from the DWP to Capita, and Capita are an agency who do these medical assessments on their behalf. So they should then kind of invite you in for a face-to-face assessment, but due to COVID, they're not doing face-to-face assessments at the moment, so it's all very much over the phone. You may be lucky enough to get something virtual so they can actually see you, but the DWP now, they're carrying out physical assessments over the phone, which is ludicrous in my opinion. But how can they physically kind of assess you over the phone? So it's all in a way kind of going against the claimant as well, these assessments. So the more evidence you can kind of provide up front, the more information you've got into making their decision, because they may not actually see you. So the person that makes the actual decision on your health is not the person you've spoken to over the phone. So that person writes a report, they pass the report on to the DWP, who then make a decision. So personally is not fit for purpose. They don't actually kind of see you, they can't actually see how you are, but that's kind of the process. If you do happen to go into an assessment centre face-to-face, just be very careful and very, very wary that you are being assessed from the moment you walk into the building or from the moment you get out of the car in the car park. There could very well be people watching or you got into it, we saw you kind of walk into the building. So be very careful. They're called informal observations, but the informal observations will have an impact on your final decision, basically. So it's not a case of you go into an assessment centre and say, okay, now we're starting the assessment. It's the general kind of whole round. And again, over the phone, they may kind of actually say, oh, you sounded kind of well on the phone today. You answered the phone with you've had a happy kind of nature about it. You know, it's in a way it all kind of goes against the person who's claiming, but just be mindful of those kind of informal observations. And that's kind of it, really. Kind of they'll come to a decision. It'll either be in your favour or it won't be. And they send you a decision letter, and the actual letter itself will kind of break down in a way kind of all the points that you've got for the various kind of activities. If you're happy with it, it'll be awarded for a certain period of time, and then it'll be reviewed in a few years down the line. If you're not happy with it for whatever reason, then you can ask them to look at it again. But it's very kind of time limited, because you'll have a letter, there'll be a date on the letter, and you'll have 1 month from the date on that letter to ask them to look at it again. And if you can kind of pick out any things that you disagree with, you can do it verbally or written. And if you can supply any more evidence at that point, which you may not be able to supply at the start, then it can be overturned in your favour at the reconsideration stage. The next stage then is the appeal. So it could very well come back again and say, no, we disagree. And then it's the appeal stage then. So it can be quite a lengthy process. If it goes all the way to appeal, I've known it to take a year. It can't be that long, but hopefully from the date of claim, if you think that you qualify, get a bit of support if you can from a benefit advisor to maybe kind of look over it, or just advise you on the way to answer the questions. And if you provide all that kind of information up front, hopefully, I'd say about 3 to 4 months, it should all be sorted. But it can be a bit of a lengthy process. So I hope I've explained that. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. You touched on it really briefly at the end there, but if I could just ask you quickly, would you advise that people do try and complete the forms themselves, or come and speak to someone like yourself to get some help?
If people are happy completing the forms themselves, that's not a problem, but I would certainly advise getting advice first before they complete them, just in relation to sitting down for 20 minutes with an advisor to say, okay, this is the way you need to answer it. This is what you need to kind of include in the actual kind of answers themselves. This is the evidence you need to supply. Because a lot of people are happy to kind of do it themselves. Just to make you aware as well, they are sending out online forms as well now, so you can either do it online or you can do it paper-based. I like paper-based because if something's sent to somebody online, it's maybe kind of on their device, it's on their computer, and then if they're coming to you for help with it, it's a little bit more kind of difficult to kind of fill it all in. Also as well, once you fill the form in, it's very good to take a photocopy of it. So all the evidence you've got, please take photocopies of it and keep them safe, because once you've put that in that brown envelope, once you've posted it away, it's in the lap of the gods, and you never know, things do go missing in the post and they may not receive it. So if you didn't take a photocopy, then it's a case of filling the whole thing in again. So I would get advice, certainly, and where possible, book in with a benefit advisor to complete the application form. I think it'll be in your best interest.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I'm just going to stop the recording, pause the recording. Okay. Mike, could you tell us a little bit about the best way for a woman with a cancer diagnosis to manage maternity leave and sick leave?
Okay, good question. with somebody who is expecting, then you would have given your employer, hopefully, a date for when your due date, in a way. So once you've kind of done that, and you've got to do that within 15 weeks of the actual kind of due date itself. So once you've kind of done that, you do then have the right and have the entitlement to maternity leave, for antenatal time off, for scans and whatever there. So you've got to kind of do that first of all. So once you've got that kind of date, then hopefully leading up to it, you won't maybe need to take some time off sick, but you never know. You never know. I mean, you're an employee, and if you play in your national insurance contribution, for example, and there's an employee on your contract, you're an employee of a company, then in a way your sickness or your sick kind of leave, your sick policy with work is exactly the same as if you weren't pregnant or you didn't have a cancer diagnosis. You know, you just kind of go down the same kind of sickness policy in a way then. So you can't really kind of start your maternity leave early, but what you can do is, if you're not well kind of running up to the day that the child, or the day the child's due, then basically you can take sick leave like the rest of the employees in that company. So it could be just statutory sick pay, for example, it could be company sick pay, and you may, as I say, not need to take any kind of time off up to the due date, but it's very kind of likely if you're going to be having treatment, then up to that due date, you're going to take some sick leave. So with sick leave, as I say, if you earn over a certain amount of money, so if you earn over £120 a week for your employer, then you should be eligible for statutory sick pay. Hopefully you get company sick pay on top of that. And then sometimes an employer, if you're off sick, will pay 6 months full pay, and then they'll pay 6 months half pay. So if at some point you need to take time off, you'll hopefully kind of run along on full pay until then you're ready to kind of start your maternity leave. So as in, once you kind of once you've got stuck there. So yeah, so once you kind of started your sick leave, in a way, your employer can't force you to take your maternity leave early. So if you're off due to ill health, and the ill health isn't pregnancy related, then you can not be forced to start your maternity leave early. If it's pregnancy related, then it's only 4 weeks. So they can, if it's a pregnancy related illness, kind of ask you, okay, we want you to start your maternity leave early. If not, then you just kind of go along as normal on your sick pay, and then at some point within 11 weeks of the date that you're due to give birth, you can then start your maternity leave. It's up to you, but it's kind of within the 11 weeks of your due date. You may have to, maybe the baby may have to be born early, for example, because of the treatment, because of your health. So in that case, your expected kind of week of childbirth, if you like, is moved on. So again, you can, as long as it's kind of within that 11-week period, you can start, let's say, your maternity leave early. But up until that point, it's just sick leave. Hopefully, it'll be at full pay. If not, and you may need to take some time off, it could be at statutory. The first 6 weeks of your maternity leave, once you've started your maternity leave, basically, is at 90% of 8 weeks of pay that you had before you went off on maternity leave. So if you happen to be off when you're just earning statutory sick pay, then it's going to be 90% of that. If you happen to be on full pay, then it's 90% of the full pay. So that's kind of then what your first 6 weeks of your maternity pay is. It then kind of runs on for the next 33 weeks. Then you get 151.97. That's your statutory maternity pay. They have to pay it to that. They have to pay you that. Hopefully they'll top it up with company maternity pay. but they have to pay you the statutory. But you've got to qualify for the statutory first of all. So how you qualify for the statutory, just to make sure that you qualify for it, is you have your expected kind of week that you do to give birth. So you come back 15 weeks. And then from week 15, you must be in continuous employment for 26 weeks to have your, and that kind of, that's your entitlement then for statutory maternity pay at £151.97 a week. When it says continuous employment, it doesn't mean that you have to be in work every day. You can take annual leave, you can be off sick, but as long as you're employed and there's no break in your contract, then that continuous kind of employment carries on. This can be a little bit more different for agency workers or people on zero contracts, for example, who may have a break in their contract because there may be no work, or they may be working for a period of time and then there's nothing and then it starts again. So sometimes on a zero contract or an agency, if you're classed as a worker, you don't kind of have the rights as an employee. So you haven't got all those kind of time off appointments, for example, antenatal appointments, you haven't got kind of any of that. So once you've started your maternity leave in a way, your maternity leave lasts for a maximum of 52 weeks. So it's a year, but it's kind of broken down and obviously kind of into maternity pay. So hopefully, as I say, on top of the 151 that you get, then you'll have company maternity pay as well on top of that. So hopefully your wage won't differ too much from where you are kind of working full time. But the way it's kind of broken down is you're entitled to ordinary kind of maternity pay. So that's for 26 weeks. So sometimes after 26 weeks, you may want to go back to work. And as long as you can have let your employer know within 8 weeks of your actual kind of day that you want to go back, and you can change your mind at any point. You don't have to say I'm coming back then and hold it to it if you're not feeling well. Then you can take some more time off as long as you've got that 8 week kind of date in a way, that notice period. So the first 2 weeks is compulsory maternity pay. So up until I think it was 1983 or 1993 actually, that you didn't have to take any time off at all. You could literally kind of go back to work straight away as soon as the baby was born. But now you have to take compulsory, you have to take a fortnight. If you work in a factory, you have to take a month. If it's more physical work, you have to take 4 weeks. It's compulsory, you've got no choice. Following that, then the next kind of 33 weeks are statutory maternity, so it's your ordinary kind of maternity pay in a way. So that's what you get. And then after that, there's the addition, you've got the option then the next 26, sorry, the first 26 weeks is ordinary maternity pay, then the next 26 weeks to make it up to 52. Basically, then you can take additional maternity leave. So again, with the first kind of 26 weeks, if you decide to go back to work then your rights in a way kind of are protected, as in you can kind of return to the job that you were doing initially. If you decide to take additional maternity leave, then when you do go back, your employer doesn't have to kind of give you your old job back in a way. It has to be kind of obviously kind of very kind of similar to what you're doing, but if they've had to get somebody in to actually kind of do that job, then it may not be the old job that you go back to. So if you don't, you may not qualify for statutory maternity pay because of this kind of continuous kind of employment. You may have just started with somebody, for example. There is then something called maternity allowance. Now this is apparent for anybody who's unapplicable for anybody who's self-employed, because anybody self-employed, they don't work for a company, so they don't pay their class 1 national insurance contributions. So therefore, we're not going to be eligible for any kind of statutory maternity pay. But then there's maternity allowance. Same amount of money, 151.97, and it's a little bit more kind of flexible, if you like, than on the kind of criteria, because you must have been employed for, I've got to read this, at least 26 weeks out of the previous 66 weeks before your baby is due. So if you go back 66 weeks from when your baby is due, you have to be employed for 26 weeks of that, at least 26 weeks, in order to qualify for maternity allowance. Again, it's paid for 39 weeks in total, as is statutory maternity pay, sorry, it's 39 weeks in total. And it can be claimed once pregnant for 26 weeks. So once you've been pregnant for 26 weeks, you can kind of start, you can start then, and it can start up to 11 weeks before your due date. So you can, like statutory maternity pay, you can start kind of 11 weeks, again, maternity allowance, you can start that up to 11 weeks as well. So once it's exhausted, so once the 39 weeks has gone, your statutory kind of entitlement is over. So that's maternity allowance and statutory sick pay. So a lot of people kind of will then return to work, because even though you're allowed 52 weeks off, I mean, 39, what kind of income have you got coming in kind of during that period? But if you're too unwell to work, if you're too unwell to go back to work, then there's nothing to say that you can't then kind of access your company's sickness policy again and start a period of sick leave. It may just be statutory sick pay, depending on who you work for, but you could then kind of go from statutory maternity pay back to statutory sick pay if you're too unwell to return to work. The company sick pay, if you're too unwell to work that you have to finish and you're not going to be able to go back to work at all, the statutory maternity pay, then that will kind of be protected, as in you haven't got to kind of pay anything back. But sometimes if you don't kind of return to work, then whatever contractual maternity pay you may have had over that period, they may, under certain circumstances, ask you to kind of pay that back, because they were paying it to you in the intention that you were going to return to work. So with statutory maternity pay, in a way, going back, hopefully you can work right up to your date of birth. If not, and you have to take time off sick, then it's company policy in a way, unless it's pregnancy related, your illness, they can't force you to take it early, but then it's up to you within the 11 weeks prior to the day that you do to give birth, then you can start your maternity at any point within those 11 weeks. Obviously, the more you take at the start, the less you get kind of after the baby's born. You then go through your statutory maternity entitlement, which means you can't really kind of claim any sick pay because you've now accessed your maternity allowance. When that finishes, then you could either return to work, or you could kind of maybe look at sickness benefit, employment and support allowance, for example, statutory sick pay. That might be an option. And if you've got no income after the 39 weeks, possibly kind of universal credit might be an option, which is a different kind of benefit altogether. But that kind of looks at, it's a means tested benefit for people on a low income. So if you happen to be a single parent, or if you happen to be with a partner but maybe kind of having a low income, then you may get some universal credit to kind of top you up to the period where you're ready to go back to work.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Okay, just pause the recording.
Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay.
and giving us an awful lot of information, which is, I'm sure, going to be really useful. I have another question. So we often see families that are living in poverty and facing hardship, and especially around the costs of childcare during treatment. Many of our families, need to access paid childcare, so they can rest, attend appointments. So really we're looking at it, are there any other kinds of financial support that they can access? So around childcare, or maybe other ways to, I guess, give them some financial support in their, during their diagnosis and treatment.
Okay. It's a tough one, kind of accessing childcare. You've got a cancer diagnosis, you've just given birth. You need the time off to kind of think of yourself as well. So yeah, it's kind of difficult to kind of find that kind of paid support, because I think Macmillan did a survey not that long ago which said once somebody's kind of off the 500 or 570 pound a month worse off due to a cancer diagnosis, so got a little child as well, a baby to kind of look after, then yeah, it can be really kind of difficult to find the actual kind of finances to find somebody in a way to kind of look after the little one. A lot of people will rely on family members, friends, to kind of take over the childcare responsibilities, maybe kind of for a few days whilst somebody's kind of getting through the treatment. But there's not a lot of financial kind of help out there for having had with a newborn baby. If you've got 3-4-year-olds, yes, you've got some free childcare possibly that you could kind of access, but you need the kind of financial support now and just kind of giving birth in order to get through this period. So there's not a lot of financial support out there for that, but grants in a way, and some kind of benefits do give you extra money because you have had a baby. So you may then be able to kind of access some benefits which may kind of give you some extra kind of income coming in, which you could then hopefully kind of use maybe for some kind of childcare. I know Mammy Star, they do some grants and they can be kind of put to good use in order to kind of hopefully kind of pay for some childcare. If you have a baby and you're on a means tested benefit, so we're looking at kind of universal credit, income support, income related employment and support allowance, child tax credit, then you could be kind of eligible for a Sure Start kind of maternity grant. So that's going to be £500, and as long as you're on that kind of means tested benefit, then you qualify if it's your first child, or if you don't have any other children under 16. So it's kind of more of a one-off kind of payment if you're on a means tested benefit. So a Sure Start maternity grant, £500. Hopefully you may be eligible for that. People with a cancer diagnosis, Macmillan do some small grants. They're one-off payments of £350, but they can be put to use for childcare, to pay for a registered childminder. They can also be used for extra heating costs, travelling back and forth to hospital, because all this kind of expense kind of mounts up when you're going back and forth for treatment. So they're £350 and they're means tested. So it does take into account any savings that you may have, any income that's coming into the house in general, but then they do take into account if you're paying rent. So they take that into account, council tax, for example, mortgage, they take all of those things into account. And if you're left with a disposable income, the savings have got to be below £8,000 per couple, and about £400 is disposable income once everything's taken out. And if you've got less than that, then you should qualify for a grant from Macmillan. You can't apply for those yourself, but what you can do is have a chat with a benefits advisor or your specialist nurse, who will be able to kind of fill in the medical report of the grant form, which confirms diagnosis, confirms treatment, and then they or a benefits advisor would be able to apply for those grants on your behalf. There's a fantastic website, an organisation called Turn to Us. They have some fantastic kind of grants on there. They do a grant themselves, a kind of a hardship grant. So Again, kind of means tested very much kind of in the way of Macmillan. They look at kind of your income, but they look at your outgoings as well. But you could be looking at £1,000, £1,500, £2,000 as a grant, one-off payment there as well. So quite a big sum of money as a grant, and none of these grants you've got to pay back. So these are actually kind of grants for you to help you, as I say, hopefully kind of pay for some childcare. Again, the Turn to Us grants have to be completed by an intermediary, so it could be Citizens Advice Bureau, for example, ourselves at Maggie's. It has to be kind of via an official kind of channel in a way. You can't kind of apply yourself. There's a kind of a grant search tool on the Turn to Us website. So you can look for grants in line with your occupation. So there are grants out there for people who work in retail, people who maybe work in a factory, people who work, you'd be surprised the amount of grants that are kind of actually kind of out there based on kind of people's occupation. So it may be with anybody can go on to the Turn to Us. If you Google Turn to Us, anybody can kind of go on and have a look at the actual kind of grants themselves, put in their kind of criteria, put in their occupation, see what kind of comes up. And then the criteria then for each grant will obviously be listed there. We need proof, for example, that you work in retail or you have worked in the performing arts for a certain amount of years. You know, there's a lot of kind of criteria you have to meet, but there are some grants out there which may very well be applicable to you. And again, if you find something, have a chat with the benefits advisor, phone up Maggie's, Macmillan, Citizens Advice Bureau, whoever maybe kind of you're dealing with, have a chat with them, say, look, I found this grant, is there any way that you can help me kind of apply for it? And more than happy to do so. So there's a few grants. If you happen to be on tax credits at the moment, so child tax credit, a new baby, you can get some kind of extra tax credits. That works out at about £2,800 per child per year. So increasing your tax credits, child benefit as well. So you may all of a sudden be eligible for child benefit. If it's your first child, you're looking at kind of £21 a week, £14 a week then for any, if it's your second child. So there's an application for child benefit as well. I mentioned earlier about universal credit. Now, universal credit is a means tested benefit, but there are specific elements in it. So if you were part of a couple but you didn't have a child, so this is your first baby, then you may not have qualified for universal credit before, because the standard rate is £509 a month for a couple. If you've got income over that, then you discount it. But there's a child element to it as well, plus there's a sickness element to it as well. So if you have a cancer diagnosis, then all of a sudden you become eligible for the sickness element of universal credit, which is £343 a month. So all of a sudden you've gone from 500, £343 on top of that. Plus as well, if you've had a baby, there's a child element. So the child element works out at £282.50 a month for every child that you have. So from quite a low standard amount for universal credit, you may find, because you're going through treatment, because you have a cancer diagnosis, you meet the criteria for the sickness element of universal credit. You then have had the baby, so you qualify for the child element of universal credit. So you may find that whereas maybe before you weren't eligible, you could very well be eligible now. So universal credit may be something to look at. With universal credit though, I wouldn't jump in and make a claim, because it replaces benefits like income support, housing benefit. It also replaces tax credits as well. So if you're having working tax and would be eligible for child tax credit already, then if you make the claim for universal credit, you lose those straight away. Even if by making the claim for universal credit, it turns out that you're not eligible for anything, you can't then go back and say, I'd like my tax credits reinstated, or I'd like to apply for tax credits again. You can't. So seek advice in relation to universal credit, just to see if you do qualify, because it may mean you could lose your tax credits and your housing benefit, and you may be in a bit of a worse situation than you were previously. So seek advice, but the child element and the sickness element are there to give you extra money. It's something worth thinking about. I think I've kind of covered everything there as far as grants and financial support.
Thanks, Mike. Just pause again.
Hi, Mike. And finally, is there anything else you'd suggest people look into that we haven't covered? For example, critical illness cover, mortgage payment breaks, etc.
Yes, certainly. Critical illness cover is a big one. You may have a life insurance policy. You may have taken it out a number of years ago. You may not even know what's included on the policy, but very often a policy, if you look at it, will include critical illness. If it does include critical illness, then you should be able to kind of claim on the critical illness cover if you have confirmation that you have a cancer diagnosis and you're going through treatment. So it doesn't necessarily look at the prognosis or the staging of the cancer in a way. It's very much, do you have a cancer diagnosis? Yes, then most insurers will kind of pay out on critical illness cover. There will be quite a few forms to fill in. You will need some supporting kind of confirmation and evidence from your oncologist just to confirm that yes, this is a part, this is a diagnosis, and then critical illness cover could pay off your mortgage. This is, I mean, it's as big as that. It could kind of pay off your mortgage, or if not, certainly kind of pay off part of your mortgage. Definitely. Looking at mortgages in general, there's not a lot of support out there for if you're a house owner as far as kind of maybe getting help with the rent. Because you don't rent, basically, then you don't get any kind of help. So if you had rent, then it would be housing benefit or the housing kind of element of universal credit. But because you're a homeowner, there's not a lot of support out there for mortgage, help with your mortgage. So if you could cover that with critical illness cover, great. But there is a little bit of support from the government in mortgage interest kind of relief. So it's helping you with the interest side of a mortgage, if you're unable to kind of meet the full mortgage. So you could be on an interest only mortgage, for example, and if you meet the criteria, then up to £200,000, they'll pay your mortgage for you for a period of time. So yeah, there's the mortgage interest relief there. You have to be on a means tested benefit in order to qualify for the help of the mortgage interest. And they've moved the goalposts a bit here. However, you have to be on the means tested benefit for 39 weeks before you can. So it's a long time. You may already be on universal credit anyway at the moment on a means tested benefit. So as long as you've been on it for 39 weeks or more, it's a long wait if you just kind of starting the claim process. But it will help with the interest on the mortgage. But they've also kind of moved the goalpost now, as in they've turned it into a loan. So it's a loan which gathers interest. It's also fixed a charge on your property. So at some point that would have to be paid back. Whether it's if you sell the house a little bit further down the line, that would have to be paid back. But it's an option. If you are kind of struggling to pay the mortgage, then it's an option, this kind of interest relief on the mortgage. But what I would say is talk to your lender as well. Be open. You don't have to tell them you have a cancer diagnosis. If you're meeting the payments, then it's fine. But if you know you're on pay, which is going to maybe drop, if you may be a single parent or your husband, your wife, partner has to take time off to care for you, so all of a sudden kind of income is kind of dropping kind of significantly, and then a bit further down the line you are not kind of meeting the mortgage payments, they're going to want to know why. So I think being open, being honest with them and explaining your situation at the start, then if you do need a little bit of help in the future, then they may be able to kind of freeze your mortgage payments for a while, give you a payment holiday. There's nothing to say that they can't do that. If you were off work with COVID and you were on furlough, they were giving you 6 months straight away as a payment holiday. So you have a cancer diagnosis, you're struggling to meet payments, there's nothing to say that they can't give you a payment holiday, sometimes kind of up to 6 months. The payments that you've missed would obviously be added on at the end, and it may be increased kind of payments of a few pounds a month, but at that period of time when you need help, if they can freeze it for a period of time, it's worth kind of asking, it's worth going to your lender. Again, things like kind of credit cards, if you're struggling to kind of meet the payments, personal loans, can you kind of get in touch with the providers to say, look, this is the situation at the moment, I'm finding I'm struggling to kind of meet payments, can we have a payment holiday? There's a good chance that you would kind of get something, even if it's for a few months, just to kind of tide you over for a period of time. There's small things like, I know Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, prescription charges, you mean they're free, but in England they're not. If you have a cancer diagnosis, then you get free prescription charges. You just speak to your GP, get a form from the GP. It's £9.35 an item. So £9.35 an item, if you need a lot of medication, is quite a lot of money. And if at the time you need a little bit of help financially, then make sure you kind of seek that out from the GP and get free prescription for a while. The NHS as well, they also do a low income scheme. So whereby you may have had to pay for things because you're not on a means tested benefit, for example. If you have a low income, and what they mean by low income is if your income is very much kind of running parallel with your outgoings, then there's a form that you can kind of download whereby you can then claim back any travel fares for hospital appointments. So if you're kind of going back and forward to hospital, if you meet the criteria for the NHS low income scheme, then you could claim your travel fares back. If you're going for treatment, going for bloods, if you're going for scans, it all kind of amounts up. And if you're living in a rural location as well, then the costs are kind of going back and forth as they can kind of mount up. So maybe worth looking at that. If you happen to be on a means tested benefit anyway, then you can claim back your travel fares to the hospital. So just make sure you have your award letter. So it could be universal credit, income support, for example, income-based employment support allowance, job seekers allowance. Then as long as you've got your award letter and you've got confirmation of your appointment, every hospital has a payment office. So just go in, where can I claim my travel fares back? They point you in the right direction. They'll work out the return mileage from the house to the hospital, and they'll reimburse you something. Not a huge amount of money, but it's X amount of pence per mile, and then you could get something back, especially if you've got lots of hospital appointments. The NHS, the low income scheme, they look that's free sight tests as well. Then it's free dental treatment, so it may be worth kind of looking, possibly, and getting some advice on the NHS low income scheme. Energy bills is a big one at the moment. Call your provider, I would say, as early as possible. Let them know if you are struggling. The price of gas has gone through the roof at the moment, electricity. If you're on a fixed rate, I would probably say maybe better to stay on a fixed rate at the moment. You know kind of where you are with things. But you feel cold a lot more with treatment. A lot of people find the side effect of treatment. You feel a lot cold. And what they do say is it can cost up to £177, £200 a month, a year, sorry, with bills, extra kind of bills on top, just because you can heat them up a little bit more. And then the grants, obviously, what we mentioned earlier from Macmillan and Turn to Us can kind of help as well, kind of with heating costs. It's the last thing you want to worry about, really, is kind of have to turn the heating off or turn the heating down when you're feeling really, really cold. So speak to your energy provider, because you never know, they may be able to help you out. Npower, they've got a partnership with Macmillan, so if you happen to be with Npower, if you're struggling with your bills, just kind of let them know. They may be able to cap them. they may be able to write off any debt that you've accrued because you have a cancer diagnosis. British Gas, they work again kind of specifically with Click Sargent advisors, and they specialise in help for cancer patients under 25. So if you happen to be under 25, you may be able to get a little bit of help from Click Sargent. Anglian Water, British Gas, EDF, E.ON, they've all got charitable trusts which offer grants which can help kind of clear household bill debt. And again, kind of fund possibly kind of energy efficiency improvements. So that might as well be an option. And when we're looking at kind of energy efficiency improvements, there are things like Nest, for example, in Wales, where if you're on a means tested benefit, this is a government initiative whereby you could get insulation, new boilers, that sort of thing, which will hopefully kind of make your property more energy efficient, which will mean resulting in hopefully kind of less bills. And again, water providers, it may be worth going to water providers because they can cap your water rates if you're using a significant amount of water. So if you have a diagnosis which means that you may be kind of washing clothing more, washing sheets more, using a lot more kind of water than any water provider, and again, as long as you're on a means tested benefit, may be able to kind of help you cap your water rate so you're not using kind of as much water, or you're using the water, you're just kind of not paying for the actual kind of extra kind of water that you are using as a result. So we've looked at the bank, as I say, Lloyds Bank, Nationwide. Again, they've both kind of teamed up with Macmillan. They've got kind of dedicated kind of customer helplines. So talk to your bank if you're struggling with anything mortgage related, loan related, credit card related. Talk to them. They will hopefully be able to kind of help you with some payment holidays until you're ready, kind of when you're feeling better again and you're ready to go back to work. I think I've covered everything. Yes, I have. I can't think of anything else.
Thanks, Mike. Let me just pause.